Chris and Chris Talk Movies.
Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Chris Ferry, and of course, this is my co-host.
My name is Chris Huddleston.
And today we are very excited to be talking to you about the 1984, yes, 1984 Australian feature.
Australian.
Razorback.
Razorback. Yes, you have to do the Australian accent. Although we have Australian listeners, so we might not want to. We might offend them. I don't know.
Well, it's a celebration. It's not a.
It is.
Anyway, trailer.
Out here is where it will find you. She was the last one to see it.
She's missing. It was an accident.
Now, he must face it
Thought you might know what happened to her.
alone. God has created it, and hell has given it a name. Now, there's a new breed of terror. Razorback.
Okay, so I hadn't seen it. Had you seen it? Oh, synopsis.
I had not.
Synopsis.
So synopsis is, so as we said, it's 84 Australian film Razorback. One of the stars is Gregory Harrison. I don't know if anyone would know. And it's directed by Russell Mulcahy, who I did not realize until later directed Highlander. Directed Highlander. So all right, so the synopsis is, this is from IMDb. As a vicious wild boar terrorizes the Australian outback, the husband of one of the victims is joined, that's a spoiler, of one of the victims is joined by a hunter and farmer in a search for the beast.
Yes.
I kind of wish it didn't have that spoiler in there, because that,
Right.
to me, that was kind of a surprising element in the film.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
So spoiler alert, this woman who you think is the main character dies early on. So
as usual, we spoil these movies. So sorry if you've had Razorback on your list since
you've been,
1984.
damn it, I've always been wanting to watch Razorbacks since
You
1984.
ruined it.
Had you even? We'll go ahead and what you thought of it, but were you aware of this movie at all?
I had never even heard of it. I think actually you might have sent me a link to it way back when we were starting our spreadsheet of possible things to do, and at the time I
think I did. Yeah,
there were so many other ones that I was more interested in doing, and for some reason when you brought it back around this time, I was like, oh, okay, right. Yeah, we should take a look at this. And it's interesting to hear that it was directed by the same guy who did Highlander. I was expecting this movie to suck with a capital Uck, and it did not suck. It did not. I don't think it was great, but I enjoyed watching it. I think there is a little bit of it comes right out of the gate. We meet I guess she's an animal rights activist, and she's sort of she's a journalist, and she does these sort of expose pieces on places such as there's a pet food plant in Australia that is where she's going to kind of expose and get inside of when she heads down to Australia. And so, and we meet her husband. They live in New York, and she says, oh, I got to go to Australia. I'm going to miss my anniversary. I'm pregnant. Right. And we just presume that she is the Ridley, so to speak, of this like Alien, this one's called Razorback. So the bad guy's a Razorback. So another spoiler for you.
The Razorback is the villain.
Yes. Well,
You could also look at it as Jaws in Australia with a razorback instead of a
that's
shark.
true on land. So it was pretty good. I would say there is some stuff that it's a little overripe. The other characters at play here, there's an old man who is kind of well, I guess he's a hunter. We meet some kangaroo hunters in this, and he's a boar hunter, so he goes out and kills. That's kind of what he does, and he is putting his grandson to bed in the opening hook scene, and this giant, we don't really see it in this opening scene, but this giant thing, the Razorback is huge, like prehistoric proportions. It's the size of a rhino, they say. It literally just comes busting through the wall and like runs off with his son in his jaws. And so he goes staggering outside and has this really over the top acting scene where he's like drops to his knees and basically is like, no, why? And it's really,
the title comes up, Razorback.
Yeah,
I liked that.
Yeah, it's really overripe, but squarely within the strike zone for a film like this. So, and then we meet her, and she's in New York, and it didn't sound like she spoke American English. Like it sounded like she had a different accent and she was doing an American accent because she sounded weird.
I thought the same thing. I wondered at times if she was dubbed. I wasn't sure. I should, while you're speaking, I should look and see if she is American.
Sure. Well, anyway, that was a little distracting to me. It was interesting to see, there's this depiction of New York where it's like the streets of New York, and
she's Australian.
Yeah.
So yeah, it definitely seemed strange.
In another, it's like an Australian movie. So it's like, now we're going to New York City. I can't do it. I'm sorry. I can't do an Australian accent. But so then there's this shot of like streets of New York, urban, boom boxes, taxi cabs. Hey, buddy, and it's this great early 80s, throwback Thursday of New York for an intro scene there. I loved that. And they're in this apartment, and he says goodbye to her, and she heads down there, and she's got a cameraman that she's working with who's Australian. They go to this little podunk town that is just full of the whole sustenance there. Everybody at the local pub anyway is some kind of hunter. They either hunt the kangaroos or they hunt the boars or something. So she shows up, and she's almost, instantly unpopular, and so I'm sort of recognize her. And we meet a couple of the other peripheral characters in the movie, two of whom are a pair of brothers that own the pet food company. They're kangaroo hunters, and they are singularly loathsome. One more than the other. Yeah, one more than the other. Oh, I totally skipped the trial. So the old man gets put on trial for killing his son. Nobody believes him, and he testifies that there's the giant boar, and that's kind of it's a kangaroo court.
It was.
Anyway, but he does it. I was sure that it was just getting ended guilty, but at the end, the guy's like, dismissed. There's not enough evidence. And you're like, oh, because the prosecutor was basically eating the other guy's lunch. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so he gets off, but he's bereft, and so it was his grandson. His daughter had left his grandson with him to take care of him, and she doesn't believe that there's this unbelievable thing that happened. So she's not sure, but it ruins that relationship too. So now he was a crusty old man, but he's now even crustier and more bitter. And he's now Ahab. He's got this vendetta against this giant thing that nobody else believes exists. So, okay, so I know I'm rambling here, but I'll get us to a place where she's out in the outback. I forget, is she going home where her car breaks down, basically?
Well, so she goes out. So for whatever reason, the cameraman stays behind at the pub to tell funny stories to the local farmers and everything. And she goes out to get not like hidden camera footage, but she goes and sticks her camera in the window of the slaughterhouse.
That's right.
To show the horrible things that they're doing.
That's
and
right.
They follow her and they run her off the road.
They spot her and give chase, and they run her off the road. And then so she crashes and they stop and they drag her out of the car. And the younger of the two brothers is about to rape her.
Mm-hmm.
And then the boar shows up, right? Then the Razorback shows up and sort of scares the two brothers off. They run off, but it eats the woman.
They do a little switcheroo because you think, oh, the Razorback is going to kill them and she'll be able to get away. That's what I thought was going to happen anyway.
If she had been the main character, that's what would have been.
Yeah. And then it turns out it's Psycho, where she is not the main character. They kill her.
And of course, that then her fiance or husband shows up in Australia looking for answers. And it turns out that he's the principal character. We introduce another pretty young blonde woman that becomes the love interest. And they sort of team up with the old man ultimately to hunt down this thing. And these two brothers are the kind of, they're bad news from the minute you see them. And they really, and the younger one is, this comes up a lot in the early 80s movies, but he's a total psychopath. Like, he runs over a dog in the road for no reason. And his brother, who is a real piece of work, goes, "What'd you do that for?" And there's this shot of him. He's like, "I don't know." And so we established that this guy clearly loves to just be cruel to animals and people without motivation. Like, that's what he does.
He's just evil.
And the other guy isn't really that way, but he's 100% an enabler of his brother. He doesn't try and stop him. So that's the movie. Now we have, he sort of goes and meets these brothers, and they kind of strand him out in the outback, and he has to sort of on foot walk his way back to civilization. He gets lucky and he stumbles across this house where this other blonde woman lives. And so she takes him in and helps him get cleaned up and gives him some clothes. And that's they start a friendship, but it's the beginning of a romantic relationship. That's accurate, right? We don't really see that flower in the course of the movie.
She's definitely very interested in him. It's kind of funny.
He literally just lost his wife. So
it's funny in the movie because he doesn't yet know that she has been killed. He thinks she's fallen down a mine shaft, and it's kind of like the girl is like, "Hey, I'm sorry that your wife fell down a mine shaft, but would you that your wife fell down a mine shaft, a few days ago? But would you like to get together?" It's kind of like that,
Yeah, things
it's like it's lonely out here in the outback because all these creeps that live around here.
There aren't a lot of eligible men. We've been to the pub. That's everyone. There's just not a lot to pick from. But, it's pretty good. We see the boar seems to show up sort of randomly. It doesn't, there's no, she tags these boars for some reason to sort of,
some kind of a government job where she's checking the migration of them or something.
So that comes into play where the old man ends up tagging the boar, trying to kill him. He runs out of bullets, and then he picks up the dart gun and tags him. And that comes into play later where they sort of think they're going to track it down, and it's a red herring. It turns out it's one of the other pigs she tracked. And I think, the way that A leads to B leads to C in terms of plot in this movie actually felt some of these movies, it really strains. Like they walk into a place on the other side of town and there's precisely the person they've been looking for. And it's just a coincidence. And there's a series of those things that you're like, well, this is movie logic where, things happen exactly the way they need to happen in order to make a certain story work. And I don't know that I felt like that. This didn't feel like that. I think they ran into it a lot. Like it was out there and they ran into it an awful lot after how many years of like it being completely MIA. Suddenly it's everywhere. But it's not like in Jaws where it seems to be hunting them. It's just they're kind of zeroing in on it and it's incredibly dangerous. And then we've got a showdown at the end that of course happens at the pet food factory, which is disgusting, by the way. I mean, the pet food factory is this huge industrial thing that is just these two brothers running, and they're totally inept, and they like seem to live.
Yeah, how are they smart enough to run the thing?
They seem to live in a cave underneath it.
Yeah.
And it's just full of meat hooks and carcasses, and basically they kill the kangaroos and they chop up the kangaroos for dog food. And there's just like conveyor belts that are stained with blood and viscera and paws. I mean, this place is absolutely, it's like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Whoever designed the sets for that there's like, oh no, it's a nightmare place. There's like burned out bulbs and red lights, and you're like, this is not safe.
This is not up to code.
You can't work here. So of course you get the obligatory, there's a big conveyor belt that ends in a sort of a pit that's got anti-rotating choppers. That's there for some reason. Like, oh, is that how you make dog food? And there's a giant boiler downstairs that they establish. It's always just about to kind of overheat. You have to kind of bang it in just the right way, and then the needle comes back down and doesn't blow up the entire city block. So
yeah.
So we lay a lot of these kind of sort of B-film cliche traps that end up getting sprung. But I mean, I think the bore effects were pretty good, and
it looks
for
good.
The most part, the performances were pretty good, and you genuinely loathe those two brothers. It's amazing to me that they haven't been shot or
murdered by the other farmers.
Exactly, because these guys are just troublemakers from start to finish. They shoot
the old guy when he goes to question them,
Yeah. So yeah. I don't know. I mean, I've been rattling on. What do you think?
So I watched this with my sister and brother-in-law, and they had their kind of initial, I talked them in. I was saying, hey, you want to watch this movie with me? And they're like, what is it? It's about a wild boar that kills people. And I was like, it's Jaws with the wild boar. And they're like, okay, this is going to suck, And, we kind of took a break like halfway through, and they were like, this movie is pretty good. And I said, yeah, I feel that they're like, we thought this would suck, and it doesn't. I think it's funny that, and I don't know if it was the influence of the Mad Max movies or what, but I kept thinking watching this, did anybody ever make it, did any Australians ever make a movie where it's just like, oh, these people live in Sydney and it's like a normal place, everything in this, it's like they live on Mars and all of the people are mutants, basically. I mean, this Dickie and Benny, like we've been saying, are just these horrible people, and they wear these crazy outfits. It's just like, why are they wearing these like a fur coat and like a bright yellow, button down shirt, right, and all of this too.
Right.
And they even have their vehicle that they drive to go out and hunt the kangaroos. It is all armored and looks like something from Mad Max.
It looks like, Death Race 2000 got spikes on the front. I'm like, do you run the kangaroos over? Although when we meet,
they do, yeah.
Dickie, you're like, oh yeah, I bet he does. But you're right. It looks like it's good. They've got sheet metal like welded to it.
And I've never been to Australia, but anybody that I've ever spoken to who has gone to Australia loved it and loved the people there.
Yeah.
But all of these movies that were being made at this time, you just watch it and you're just like, that's the last place I would ever want to go in my life. It just looks like Mars, and like all these people are really weird. But so this the director, I looked him up on IMDb, and he started out as a music video director. And he directed a ton of classic. He did a bunch of Duran Duran videos. He did some Billy Joel videos, Elton John. There's a ton of. He probably did like 50 music videos, and a lot of this looks like music videos of the time. And even he did. I don't know how much do you remember the video for the Wild Boys, Duran Duran Wild Boys?
Vaguely, yes.
If you go, so I actually watched that after I watched this movie, and a lot of the stuff that you were talking about in the meat packing place or whatever, the Wild Boys video looks a lot like that, where it's scaffolding and like weird hooks, and ropes and all these kind of things. So it has a lot of that look. But I like I really like the way the film was shot. There's a lot of scenes at night where there's just light shining through the fog. It's a really, and I don't know how good the print that you saw, did it look really good? I watched it on Shudder, and it was a really great print. It looked excellent.
I thought it looked pretty good. I watched it on Amazon, I think.
Okay. But, like you said, the acting is good enough. Some of the things, I feel like there's almost kind of too many things going on at once, or too many side stories. The woman that he meets, who is, like you said, kind of a love interest, but it's not really like they hook up at the end. He does kiss her at the very end of the film, but at least it seems on his side, it's like, hey, my wife just died. I'm not ready to, move on to somebody else just yet. But
I thought that was kind of nice.
It was, yeah. It wasn't
movies, you would just switch over and you'd have to have that be the love interest. But I think it's actually, not only is it more realistic, but it's more interesting in this case to have her be clearly interested in him. She gets it. She understands he just lost his wife.
Right.
He's this really handsome guy. He's a really good looking guy. And, but he's clearly, what's driving him is finding out what happened to his wife.
Exactly.
Once he realizes these guys were involved, getting justice. And he goes back in at one point, to say he comes to care about her, but
yeah, exactly. But it almost, other than just, you have a female character that's kind of breaking up all, it's all just men. There's not a lot of purpose to it. Seems like he could have just, the hunter guy could have helped him just as much as she did. But she's fine in the role. But that's kind of a nitpicky thing. But
and if when we meet her, he stumbles out of the outback basically, and he's sunstruck and a step away from death, and she's taking a shower. So if he'd walked in, it was the old man taking a shower. That's
true. Wouldn't have been as you get the obligatory 80s nude scene, brief nude scene. So and it, this is ultimately, it's kind of like before when we talked about Class of 1984, this is ultimately, it's an exploitation film, which they were doing a lot of in Australia at the time. There were a lot of, again, I think probably because of the success of the Mad Max movies, but it's probably not until the very end where we really get a super clear shot of the Razorback himself or itself, but it looks good. There's not really a time where you're just like, this looks really bad, Yeah,
and it's doesn't have tentacles. It's just a giant, and we never get why, but it's just a giant Razorback. There's not
Yeah.
like a nuclear waste spill, or it's just the size of a VW.
Mhm.
And they do things to make it look gnarly, like the teeth and the tusks. But like with Jaws, it's just a huge animal.
Yeah, it's not
There
a
isn't some
monster.
explanation of how this huge animal came to be or why.
And it's funny, as you said, they have the trial for the old man, and it's like the people are like, "Oh, this is ridiculous that there would be a giant, this giant boar." And the woman, the wife showing up there, and she's out filming one day, out in the desert, and she spots it just for an instant, up on a hillside. So it's like this thing that nobody else has ever seen, and it's not even like you'd think it would be like almost like a myth where it's just like people have spotted it, but maybe other people would be like, that can't be. But it seems a little bit ridiculous that nobody else,
Right.
there isn't a story of anybody else being like, well, my uncle saw it,
Right.
It
could be something like, that's just a myth. It's like I guess the accusation was, okay, old man, your wife who you love dropped off your grandson who you love, and you decided to kill the grandson, burn down your house, and blame it on Bigfoot, right?
Mhm.
And instead they're like, what's a Bigfoot? He's like,
Yeah.
it almost would have been more solid if it was a local urban legend that nobody could prove it was the thing. And he's like, that almost would have made it seem like he was crazier. But he had no motive to kill his son. This was just, I think that's why.
And we have no background on him that it's like, oh, he's the town drunk that everybody hates or something. We don't really, other than we know he hunts boars. That's all we know about him.
Right. And we don't, it would have been interesting to see his daughter, who was the boy's mother, get a little more time. She just basically had one line that was something to the effect of, I don't believe him, or something like tearfully. And you're kind of like, that's some rich stuff. We should dramatic stuff could have mined that a little bit more. Like, you really think that your why would you think that your father would have killed your son? Why?
Mm-hmm.
And then lied about it. And what do you think happened? Because by all, everybody seems to take him seriously. He seems like a well-respected and competent guy in the community, and right?
Yeah, they don't act like he's insane or anything like that. So, but it, that opening scene is just kind of the standard thing that we get in so many horror movies, where it's like, well, we have to have a hook with somebody, we don't really see this little boy get killed, but so many horror movies open with somebody getting killed, and then we're on to the story until you see the killer, in this case again later on in the film.
Right. Hey, they shoot it several times, and it certainly doesn't bring it down, and it doesn't seem to affect it negatively at all. Like, it doesn't cripple it, or ultimately he beats it by sort of tricking it up onto the conveyor belt thing, getting out of the way somehow, and the thing falls into the choppers, right?
And that trope of, I wonder how many times that has happened in a movie, in the history of movies, for somebody to die on a conveyor belt where they get chopped up.
The conveyor
we saw it
belt
in Indiana Jones.
It's like the literal metaphor of like, okay, now we're on a narrative, pathway that we know where it ends.
So my kind of thoughts, this is a movie of, I don't know how I became aware of it, because it was not one. So when I watched it with my sister and my brother-in-law, we were just talking about, this is one where we just said, how did we not know about this? Because this is a movie, if this had been, and maybe it was and just never caught it, but if this had been on HBO when we were kids, this is a movie that I probably would have watched over and over again, and it's, this is almost to me the definition of a hidden gem, because it's a solid movie that would have been right in my wheelhouse at that time, that I never saw and nobody ever talks about. It has a 6.0 rating on IMDb with 6,400 ratings. Which is not a lot, but this is just a movie that never comes up. You never, you don't ever see this on any kind of lists or anything.
Yeah. I think I would call it a hidden semi-precious stone.
Yeah.
I think 6 is about right.
Yeah.
Because it was a lot better than I thought it was going to be. But,
yeah,
I don't know that I would have watched it again and again. Like if I came over to your house and you've been like, hey, you want to watch Razorback? I'm
let's
like,
watch Razorback
I
again.
don't really watch that again.
No, but I mean, there were movies at the time that I can't think of, a title right off the top of my head, but that were certainly not as good as this.
Yeah.
That just played over and over and over again on TV and on the movie channels and everything, that you just saw just because they were on,
Right. So yeah. So I mean, would you recommend it?
Yeah, I definitely would. For if you like, this is more or less a creature feature. Again, you compared it to Alien. It definitely has that. It's definitely. I just kept thinking Jaws on land in Australia, with some Mad Max kind of stuff thrown in, even though it's not a post-apocalyptic story. But yeah, I think for people who like those kind of creature feature movies, and you're looking for one that you've never seen or maybe never even heard of, I think it's a pretty good time.
Yeah, I agree. So
Excellent.
If you're listening to this, we've just ruined everything for you, but if this sounds good to you, you probably enjoy it. I mean, it's
very 80s. I mean,
there's a
has
reason
very 80s
I think
look.
I never heard of it, but it is nice to find something that I assumed, because I had never even heard of it, that it was just garbage.
You thought it was going to be a very low budget with a puppet, boar or something. And it's like who was the guy who did, I think he's still making movies now, but did like Carnosaur in the 90s. Do you remember that? That was a Jurassic Park ripoff.
Vaguely, yeah.
I'm sure people be saying his name, but that just did a lot of cheap, horror and sci-fi movies. But this is really not that. This has, I don't know what the budget would have been, a few $1 million probably.
Yeah.
Because again, the cinematography is good and has good acting and good effects and everything. So it's not like a super cheap, low budget movie.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would recommend it. So do you want to talk about some other, we've both seen some new things?
Yes.
Or newish things.
I've seen a lot of things recently. You go ahead and you start. What have you seen?
So the two main new things that I saw the new James Bond, which has now been out for, I don't know, maybe 3 weeks or something like that now. I enjoyed it a lot. It's, I've seen some mixed reviews on it, but to me, it was kind of everything that I would want in a Bond movie. I won't spoil anything, but I think it's a good send off for Daniel Craig. My only complaint, it's 2 hours and 45 minutes, something around there. That's a trend with movies that, Lord of the Rings and Schindler's List being 3 hours, that's fine. But I don't know if they feel like it's like, oh, more is better to compete with streaming or what. But I don't really feel like a James Bond movie needs to be 2 hours and 45 minutes.
I hear that.
A couple hours is a good length for something like that. That would be my only complaint. But people have talked a little bit about the villain being kind of weak, but I thought the villain was fine. So yeah, I would highly recommend, and I would say see it in the theater if you can, because it looks great. I mean, it's shot really, really well. And of course it's a James Bond movie, so tons of great stunts and everything. You were saying you had gone back and watched the previous Daniel Craig ones, and I'm sure there is some computer stuff that they're using in those, but man, a lot of it is real stunts. And there wasn't anything in this one that I thought, wow, that does not look real.
If there's CG, they use it to sort of touch stuff up,
take out wires and stuff like that.
Yeah, if there's CG, it's designed not to be seen.
Yeah,
there aren't walking robots that turn into cars.
But the stunts are just amazing,
Yeah.
So, and then the other one that I saw the new Halloween Kills. I saw that in the theater too.
Yeah, okay.
And reviews have been very mixed on that. People, it's actually like people on Twitter are really fighting over it. And the previous one that came out in 2018, I didn't like very much. I thought it was going to be good, and so I went into it with kind of high expectations and then didn't like it very much. So this one was the opposite. I went into it low expectations, and you know how sometimes you don't have much expectation for something and then you watch it and it's like, oh, that was better than I thought.
Mm-hmm.
This one is pretty ridiculous. They have a really heavy-handed, so a lot of the movie is an angry mob in the town trying to hunt down Michael Myers to kill him. And it's the director, and so Danny McBride is one of the writers, which I think is really interesting. He wrote the previous one and this one, or co-wrote it with the director, which I think that's interesting, having a guy like that, writing. So there is some humor that it's weird because it feels misplaced. Mm-hmm. But anyway, they've said that the angry mob is, they're making a commentary on social media. And it also felt very much like, they're trying to comment on maybe anti-vaxxers and, that kind of thing. And it's really, really heavy-handed and just kind of ridiculous. So pretty much my feelings on the movie were the parts where it's Michael Myers, going after people and killing is really, really well done. He's scary in the movie and looks really good. And all of that is good. And then the rest of it, I was just like, I don't care about any of the rest of this. So I was entertained by it, but it's a dumb movie. Basically, it's a dumb movie trying to be smart is how I felt watching it, So anyway, I imagine anybody who's really interested in that movie has probably seen it. So, but it was, I was entertained by it, but it was not a great movie by any means.
It's not really on my list.
I don't think you would enjoy it. I mean, there are some scenes that you would like well enough, but it's kind of like they definitely have done the thing of, well, modern horror movies, you have to be really realistic when somebody's getting killed. So there's some stuff where it's just, those old 80s movies were gross, but they were also
fake.
They were fake. So you would kind of laugh at it, and some of it is like, wow, this looks really real.
Yeah.
And painful. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, there's a scene where, this is a spoiler, but there's a scene where they actually, the crowd goes after the wrong guy. There's like a mentally ill guy who's escaped from a hospital, and they go after him thinking he's Michael Myers, and they actually chase him into the hospital, and he jumps out the window, and they show his body after he's hit the ground, and it's really super graphic, and so there's some of that, kind of stuff in it. So yeah, I definitely think it's not something that you would be into, but
I definitely want to see the latest James Bond movie.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. I can't wait till you see it so we could talk about it, because there's a lot to it.
I
with
saw
2 hours and 45 minutes.
I finally saw Black Widow in the Marvel universe, and I wasn't particularly excited about that property. But I've had to do a lot of commuting on a train recently, and it's just I'm sitting on my duff with nothing to do. And so I started watching stuff, and I watched that. And it's a lot better than I was sort of afraid it was going to be. I had a lot of fun. I thought David Harbour was great. Rachel Weisz is in it, and she's great. And of course, Scarlett Johansson. And I am forgetting the name of the actor who plays her sister, but to me, she almost steals the movie.
Mm-hmm.
She's got all the best, funniest lines, and I just couldn't wait for another scene where she started riffing.
Mm-hmm.
She's dynamite.
Oh,
and
that's
then
great.
The bad guy is Ray Winstone playing a Russian, and it's just, I mean, he's a good villain. It's just he's trying to do a Russian accent on top of his already really thick English British accent. It just, that pretty spectacularly doesn't work in that regard, but I enjoyed it. And then another thing I saw was The Last Duel with Adam Driver and Ben Affleck and Matt Damon.
Yeah. How was that?
That was really interesting. It's long. And it's slow. It's a historical drama, right? And there's fighting. It's like in the 14th century. So it's the 1300s and something. And it's set in France. And so you see there's medieval battle. And it culminates in this duel. And so the combat stuff is really graphic and gripping. Mm-hmm. And brutal. And then the sort of intrigue stuff, the shape of it is kind of like Rashomon. Do you know Kurosawa's movie Rashomon?
I'm familiar with it. I've never actually seen it, but
yeah, it's something that you would study in film school. Mm-hmm. It's really about the same story told from three different perspectives. So the shape of the movie is like, we see what happens, and then we basically see what happens again, and we realize the first time we saw it was through a particular character's POV. Not literally through, but you're seeing this person's version of those events, because then we hear it from another person who was involved, and things are more or less the same, but there are subtle differences that change everything in terms of what it all meant. And then that happens a third time. So in many ways, this movie follows that structure. Okay. And I don't want to give too much away. It's Ridley Scott. So, I mean, it's very well directed. It looks great. It looks historically accurate. I did find it distracting that it's Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. Ben Affleck. Just because they're so recognizable as who they are, and it's Adam Driver, and he's a terrific actor too, but I did keep seeing the stars rather than the characters they were portraying. Everybody does a good job. It's not that they don't do a good job. And I'm not saying I don't recommend the movie. I do. It was just really interesting. I went to a movie with a friend, and we had limited time. So I was kind of like, I'll see whatever you want. And that's what we ended up seeing. I'm not sure I'd have bought a ticket to it otherwise.
Yeah, it bombed hard, I guess. Yeah. And with the trailer, Ridley Scott is a great director. So, but I think that in the trailer, Matt Damon has that kind of silly beard
and a mullet.
And a mullet. And I think people were probably like, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck in a period, the 14th century piece, I don't know. And it might have just been the time that it was released that people didn't want to see a historical epic,
Yeah, it just feels like the timing was weird. And it was very long.
Yeah.
So despite the sort of action sequences where there's literal fighting to the death, which are relatively few and far between throughout the movie, most of it is kind of political intrigue or just sort of interpersonal, the machinations of how we got to this place. It's almost 3 hours also.
Yeah.
And you're kind of like, dude, this doesn't need to be this long. So it's closer to Barry Lyndon in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
Just like it looks real and I believe I'm here. And and then what happens?
Yeah.
Anyway, and then I started watching the Neil Blomkamp thing on Netflix. Have you
all
seen
those shorts?
Yeah.
I started to watch it one night and it was late and I was just like, I don't think I'm going to fall asleep if I try to watch this, but I'm sure they're great. They're like sci-fi shorts, right?
Yeah. You know what? I've only watched 2 of them so far. And what it looks like to me is that they're pilots. Like these are pilots that he wrote, concept things that he wrote that never got picked up. And like the 2 of them that I've seen so far are problematic in certain ways. Like you're like, I'm not sure if I would want to actually see this movie, but they all kind of leave off in a cliffhanger way that you're like, but I would like to know what happens next. Like I'm invested in it now, it's on Netflix. It's there. I mean, he gets to indulge himself in some really gross effects. There's some really upsetting stuff that is hard for me to watch, except he does it so well that I kind of can't look away,
He's the Session 9 guy, right?
Yeah. District 9.
District 9.
Chris, you have to watch District. Have you seen District 9, Chris?
I saw it.
South Africa.
I saw it in the theater, yeah, and loved it. Great. At the time.
I'm a big fan.
He's been tied to. There's been some flirtings with him doing an Alien movie, in the Aliens, franchise, and I think they got into concepts and all kinds of stuff, and it fell through, and which I think he could do a great job with that.
He could do a good job.
He'd be perfect.
It would be. I don't know. After those other Ridley Scott, I guess they're prequels. I just don't know how much more mileage that franchise has. Like,
it feels a bit like, although I think the Alien movies are a lot better, but it feels a bit like the Terminator franchise, where it's like, what more can they do? But Disney has, because Disney owns them now, and Disney isn't going to let anything just sit, and not.
No.
So Disney has said that they are going to do more Alien movies at some point. I don't know how you Disney-fy those exactly, but
I love the concept of David and how this whole thing would have gotten started. I love exploring that. And there's things about both of those movies, Prometheus and what was the other one called?
Alien Covenant.
Yeah. There's things about both of those movies that I loved, but I didn't particularly love either of those movies. Love Fassbender. I mean, everybody in it was good. You know what I mean? It's just, I was interested to explore all of that part of the overall, universe of that stuff. I just didn't end up really enjoying either movie so much.
I loved Prometheus. I liked it a lot. But it made money, but was not well received in a way because people wanted more of the same.
Yeah.
And Ridley Scott was like, I'm going to do something totally different.
Yeah.
And then I felt like with the next one, they kind of succumbed to pressure to kind of please the fans of the original movies, because they scrapped a lot of the stuff that they were going, they were going to continue in that direction. And it was like, we got to work the xenomorphs, back into this more. And I felt like that one was kind of a mess, I felt.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree.
that was, I get people not, it ultimately was not what a lot of people wanted, but I definitely, to me, I felt that he did a good thing by, are we just going to have a haunted house on a spaceship thing again? I'm not interested in that. And, some people liked it and some people didn't, but I would imagine that Disney is probably going to say like, hey, people loved the first two. Let's do something more like that, and I don't know how much, other than to just be kind of a nostalgia thing. I don't know how much fun that would be.
Yeah, well, the first one is a masterpiece in all the ways that it's a masterpiece. And then
Yeah.
James Cameron came along and really did his magic on the property.
Yeah,
Like that
made
was
it an
kind of-
action movie.
That was kind of brilliant because he's like,
Yeah.
well, that's sort of, it's like Jaws. How you make Jaws 2 like it's a shark again? You know what I mean? Like the xenomorph doesn't do anything. It doesn't have an agenda. It's a virus. It just propagates. They're not. So having one of them be the monster in the dark is, picking people off. That's a great movie. And then so where do you go from there? And I think he had brilliant instincts. He's like, now it's an action movie. Now it's a platoon of people who have a sense of what they're going up against, and it's more of a zombie movie. They're overrun by the numbers.
Yeah.
And it's not the thing coming out of the dark. It's, bunches of them streaming down the hallway and coming over the hilltops, and and it just, I thought, a brilliant way to make a sequel out of that. And then I think other people tried to do that with the subsequent sequels. Oh, now we're cloning, and now it's, and kind of like, okay, I just start to lose interest in them.
I think we've talked about it before a little bit, but I've never actually seen the third one that David Fincher directed, which I think is supposed to be kind of a mess, but that one would be a fun one to cover maybe sometime.
Sure.
Unless he hated it. I don't know.
They're all anchored by Sigourney Weaver too. And that property, I really think she carries those movies. And there's a lot of great performances in those movies. They're conceptually great, but her at the center of it is a little bit like Bruce Willis at the center of the Die Hard thing. It's like, you take away her as the lead, and then things start to get like they did Predator versus
the Alien versus Predator ones are terrible.
Yeah, you're just like, what?
They're like unwatchable.
Who am I supposed to care about in this? Right? I mean,
yeah, they're really awful.
So, and then I feel like I saw even something else that I'm forgetting. But
have you watched the Squid Game or whatever it's called?
I haven't, but
I have not.
Everybody's talking about it. I mean, I feel like it's on Netflix one of these nights. I got to sit down and wade into it. I mean, I'd love.
That's what I texted you one night, and I said we should watch. Have you ever seen Battle Royale?
I have
Japanese movie.
Never actually seen it. And House is another one that comes up a bunch. That's a Japanese movie.
We could. So the Japanese House.
Yeah,
that's one that we could try sometime. I've tried to watch it and I've never gotten all the way through it. It is a weird. We ought to do that sometime because I've
actually seen bits of it. It's not only is it really gross and upsetting, it's just narratively, you're like, what is happening?
The guy, literally, my understanding, I don't remember a lot of gross stuff in it, but the guy literally, I think he got his daughter who was a child, to either like write the script or just tell him stories. And he was just like, I'll put that, it's almost kind of like, you did Story Pirates.
Yeah.
Is almost like that. If somebody would be like, oh, I'm going to do like a horror movie based on, what a story that a child told me, because it makes absolutely no, we ought to do that some night, but I think you would just have to, that would be a really fun one.
Muscle through it.
To watch and just sit down together, like with some drinks and watch. That would, that would be the way to watch that.
I might be coming back to town.
Okay.
in a couple of weeks. So I will let you know about
We
that.
should
Maybe
we
can
should
plan
get
to do
together
that
and
together.
just because I think that's the way that you get through that movie is watch it with, not try to watch it by yourself. It's weird and it's just weird. It's one of, again, I maybe watched half to 3/4 of it, and it's one of the strangest things I've ever watched. It's really, really strange.
As we've been posting these videos, we got comments on one of them that I don't know if you saw, but the keywords you used were like first time watching or something. And somebody was like,
they were
that's
mad
actually, that's its own thing. Like that's a
Mhm.
reaction video.
Which I didn't realize that exactly what the.
So sorry, dude, if you're still watching. But we could actually do that. Like we do a podcast sitting side by side with the TV behind the computer, and we could do a podcast while we watch the show, and maybe we trim it down because there's going to be parts where nothing interesting is happening with our faces as we watch and talk about it.
Yeah, that would definitely be a good one for a reaction. But yeah, I think it would be fun to do because this is such a bizarre movie. Just really bizarre.
All right, that's worth thinking about for sure.
Yeah.
But for next week, we're gonna jump back into the bleeding edge of just released, and we're gonna talk about Denis Villeneuve's Dune.
Our favorite guy.
Our favorite guy. He certainly is my favorite guy working right now.
And you've already watched it twice, you said.
I have already watched it twice. I will watch it again before we talk about it. You're going to try and see it in the theater.
Yeah, that's my plan, is to see it in the theater. If not, I'll watch it at home on TV. But
and I've got a pretty big screen TV with a decent sound system, and I still recommend. It is so visually big that if you have the choice, I would recommend that you go take it in the theater.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we have talked about David Lynch's Dune in an earlier episode. There's no video on that, but it
sounds as if people are rediscovering that because of, I've seen a lot of talk on Twitter about the original one.
Sure. And I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but of course, David Lynch attempted to do the entire book of Dune, which is a multi-book series, but Dune itself is the first book, in the same way that Star Wars is the first, book of a whole thing. He attempted to do the whole movie, the whole book in one movie.
Mm-hmm.
And this one is just labeled Part 1. So as soon as the credits come up, it says Dune Part 1. And we're not sure yet, we're not certain yet that they'll get green lighted to do a Part 2. I think they're waiting to see on how this one does.
I read today that it's been out in other markets other than the United States for a while. And I guess it just came out in China, and it opened really big in China, but it's already hit 200 million worldwide. So I don't know what they have to bring in for it to be considered a success, but the HBO Max numbers are going to be factored in there as well. So it looks kind of good that maybe the second one will get made.
The film looks, if nothing else, I mean, you may see it, you may not like it, you may not understand it. It looks great. Yeah, I can recommend that people go see it. If you just love the purely visual aspect of going to a science fiction movie and seeing the pictures that are literally painted up there in light, it's worth it on that alone.
Yeah.
Even if you're like, I hate Dune, I'm like, this is still worth a watch. This is a pretty good job. Anyway, that's what we're doing for next week. I know it's brand new, and some of you will want to see it and won't want it spoiled. Some of you may already be familiar with the source material. You've never read the book.
No, I haven't. No.
So there may be some people like you that are familiar with the material, but have never really read the source. There may be others of you like me who are big fans and have read all of the source material. I just recently reread Dune. And we're going to talk about it. So if you want to skip next one because you don't want it to be spoiled, then we totally understand. But that's what we're doing for next time.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. This has been one that has, even, not being a fan of the books or anything like that, that has been kind of circled on my calendar just because I like what he does so much, and we don't get a lot of epic sci-fi, that this seems to be.
Yeah. And it's hard for me to, I mean, there's certainly enough material here. If the studio wanted to make this a tentpole thing, where like with Lord of the Rings, that they're like, oh, well, we can milk this out. They could be 2 movies per book. We can start with the first 3 books. That's 6 movies over, 12 years. I mean, that's plausible. I would say that the material is so dense that it would be interesting to me if what he's done in terms of adapting it has made it clear enough that an audience, because I think the audience response to the David Lynch one was like, what is happening? It's so detail oriented and it's so rich in this universe. It gets right into the politics of this house versus that house. And I think if you aren't familiar with the books and you're already into it, it might be a lot to try and get your head around. I mean, I watched it twice. I watched it the night it came out. I watched it again the second night and picked up stuff that I had missed the first time. So,
and the Lord of the Rings, those are obviously really dense stories as well.
right.
But and I've not read those books either, other than I think I read the first one, but or maybe I read The Hobbit. I don't know. I read one of them when I was a kid, but I don't know if it was just such a great job that they did with making the movies, but those were so accessible to audiences. You never felt like, I don't know what's happening, in those.
Well, and you don't, of course, Tolkien, if you read all of his stuff, there is a lot of lore about the elves and about the dwarves, but by the time we saw, and Peter Jackson did a great adaptation, a really remarkable adaptation of those books that do go off on like, and now a 12 the elves started singing a song and this is the song they sang, and the poem, he has the poem of what they're singing and it goes on for 12 pages and you're like, what are we doing? We're just gonna sing this in Elvish. Like, I don't even know what I'm reading. So he wisely, I think, chose to drop a lot of that and have the elves kind of singing in the background most of the time. But you didn't need an explanation of what an elf is.
Yeah.
Or what
a dragon
is.
or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because Dungeons and Dragons and all of that other stuff came out of Tolkien. But that was a long time ago, and it's been very, very emulated and that's not the right word, but very propagated in various ways throughout culture, and Dune has not.
Right.
So there's a lot of like sects, not sex, but sects, and brotherhoods and guilds and like the worst stuff of Star Wars is all the kind of, because it's fundamentally this kind of political, it's these powerful dynasties kind of maneuvering for control. And in the meantime, you're on the ground with characters that you come to love as they experience this crazy stuff. But that is less meaningful if you don't understand the huge architectural, plots that are unfolding. And in Lord of the Rings, the plot that's unfolding is the evil Lord is trying to take over the world. And we got to get the ring in the pit to stop him. Oh, okay. And once you get that, then it's like, oh, there's a dwarf. He's a little guy and he's crusty. And then there's an elf and he's handsome and he's light on his feet.
Yeah.
There's a wizard. He's old. He likes to get high. It's like, you just can you're like, oh, okay. Well, is he a ghost? Yeah, he's a ghost. He's trying to kill him. Oh, cool. We almost got him. There's not a whole lot of thinking you have to do to get into the Lord of the Rings. But I don't know, we'll see. I'm really excited to talk about it. I'm really excited.
I can't wait. It's going to be fun.
So we're at time. We should call it.
All right.
Anything else to add before we sign off?
I don't think so.
Great. Thanks for joining us again. And Chris and Chris Talk Movies at gmail.com. Comments, tweets, suggestions, feedback.
And if you're seeing this on YouTube, we have a podcast as well. So we're all in all of the typical podcast places. So if you'd rather just listen to audio, we have that as well.
It's true.
It's true.
And so otherwise, let's watch Dune and we will talk to you next week.